Prisons are built to confine the guilty, to keep order, to punish. But behind these walls, power isn't just held by the guards. Sometimes control belongs to those who have nothing to lose. A Florida correctional officer, a man sworn to uphold the law, found himself tangled in a secret he never should have kept. A secret that, once uncovered, would seal his fate forever. At first it seemed like just another routine shift, a long, uneventful night patrolling cell blocks lined with men who had already been forgotten by the outside world. The prison was loud, yet eerily predictable. Fights, deals, alliances forming and breaking in the shadows. But behind the scenes, something darker was lurking, something far more dangerous. It started as whispers, a rumor passed between inmates in hushed voices when no guards were near. And then, the accusations, the rage, the kind of fury that doesn't just fade, it festers, it builds, until there is nowhere left to go. By the time the truth came to light, it was already too late. A single room, a locked door, and 3 men. Only 2 would walk out alive. Was this an act of justice carried out by the betrayed, or was it something far more calculated? And in the end, did anyone truly deserve to walk away? Before we continue, if you're drawn to the darkest corners of true crime, where secrets fester and justice is never black and white, make sure to subscribe. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a case that will leave you questioning everything. Now, let's continue. Prison is a world of its own, isolated, unforgiving. A place where time moves slow, but grudges grow fast. Every face tells a story, but not all of them are told in words. Some are written in blood, in whispered threats, in debts that can never be repaid. Behind these walls, survival isn't just about strength. It's about power. And power, that comes in many forms. For some, it's violence. For others, it's control. And for one Florida prison guard, control was his greatest weapon. A weapon he wielded with promises, manipulation, and something far more intimate. For years, he walked the halls of this maximum security prison as if he were untouchable. A 42-year-old officer, stern, respected, feared. He knew the system inside and out, the rules, the loopholes, and how to bend them in his favor. But what no one knew, at least not yet, was that he had crossed a line that could never be undone, a line that would lead him straight into the hands of 2 inmates who had nothing left to lose. They weren't just inmates. They weren't just numbers in the system. They had a connection, one forged in secrecy. 2 men who had found something in each other that prison was never meant to offer. Comfort, protection, maybe even love. But in this place, love wasn't free. It had a price. And the one collecting was the very man meant to keep order? The arrangement was never spoken about in the open. It wasn't written in reports or caught on security cameras. It existed in the quiet corners of the prison, in stolen moments behind locked doors. The guard had handpicked them, drawn them into something they thought would keep them safe. He promised them privileges, better treatment, and protection from the dangers that lurked just beyond their cell doors. But trust in a place like this is fragile, and when it breaks, it shatters. At first, the inmates believed they had gained something, an advantage, a shield against the violence that waited for them in every darkened corridor. But power never truly belonged to them. It belonged to him. And when the truth surfaced, when they realized what had been done to them, it was already too late to walk away. Inside these walls, revenge is more than an idea. It's an instinct. And when the balance of power shifts, blood is always the price. At first, it was easy to ignore. The exhaustion, the night sweats, the weight loss, it could have been anything. The stress of prison life, the poor food, the lack of sunlight. Inside these walls, men wasted away every day, their bodies paying the price for the sentences they carried. But this this was different. It wasn't just one man. It wasn't just a bad week. It was spreading. Inmates watched as familiar faces grew pale, their eyes sunken, their movements sluggish. Some brushed it off, convinced it was just another sickness, something that would pass. Others weren't so sure. The symptoms, the rapid decline. It gnawed at their minds, a feeling they couldn't shake. And then, the whispers began. Rumors in prisons spread like wildfire. Sometimes they're nothing more than paranoia, stories twisted and stretched until they barely resemble the truth. But sometimes, they're warnings. And this one, it started as a hushed conversation in the yard, a quiet exchange between men who had seen too much, who had learned to recognize when something was wrong. The words crept through the cell blocks, slipping through the bars, carried by low voices and cautious glances. The kind of rumor that wasn't about a fight or an escape plan, but something far worse, something that turned stomachs and sent chills down even the hardest men's spines. One inmate, unable to ignore the feeling in his gut, decided he couldn't wait for answers to come to him. He found a way, through a favor, through quiet negotiations, through a system that was never meant to help men like him, to get tested. The wait was agonizing. Every day dragged, every minute felt stretched, the answer lingering just out of reach. But when it finally came, when the paper was placed in his hands, there was no mistaking what it said. Positive. Denial was his first reaction. Maybe it was wrong. Maybe they mixed up the results. Maybe there was something else, anything else that could explain it. But deep down, the dread had already set in. A cold, creeping realization that nothing would ever be the same again. And then, a week later, the second inmate did the same. He took the test. He waited. And when his results came back, they were identical to the first. That was the moment everything changed. The fear they had ignored, the gnawing unease, the questions that had gone unanswered for too long, it all snapped into focus. They traced it back, thought about the moments they once ignored, the encounters that felt different now in hindsight. And all the pieces led to one place, one man. A man who walked the prison halls with authority, who spoke with a voice that demanded obedience. A man they had trusted, a man they had let in. The prison guard. They confronted him. They had to. They needed answers, needed to know if what they feared was true. Their voices were sharp, desperate, shaking, not just with anger, but with something deeper. Betrayal, fear, desperation. They begged him, demanding that he take a test himself to prove them wrong, to give them even a shred of doubt that this wasn't what they thought it was. But he didn't. He refused. No explanations, no apologies, no attempt to calm the storm that had begun to rage inside them. Just silence. And in that silence they found their answer. A truth more devastating than any lie he could have told. Something inside them shifted. It wasn't just about what had happened. It was about what it meant. They had been sentenced long before this, locked away in a world that offered them nothing but walls and rules and pain. But this wasn't part of the sentence. This was something else. A betrayal deeper than any crime they had committed. One they could never escape. One that felt like a slow death waiting for them just beyond the bars. And if they were already dead men walking, then so was he. In the quiet of the prison, every day is a game of survival. But in the darkness of a single night, the rules change. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was a moment of reckoning, a time when two men, backed into a corner, decided it was time to take back what had been stolen from them. The question wasn't if they were going to act. It was when. They knew the guard's routine, knew it better than anyone else in the prison. He was predictable, arrogant, convinced that his position gave him a level of invulnerability that no one could touch. He was used to lording over the men, used to thinking they were nothing but animals in cages. But he never thought the tables could turn. He never thought the ones who trusted him would be the ones who would end it all. It started with a simple promise, a meeting, a final one last chance to speak before one of the inmates was transferred out. A promise that was nothing more than a trap, a carefully laid snare to lure the guard into the heart of the prison's darkness. A place where no cameras watched, where no help could arrive in time. The maintenance room, a small, isolated space that had become the setting for a deadly confrontation. A place where the only thing waiting behind its door was vengeance. And the guard, too blinded by his own arrogance and too certain in his role as the puppet master, walked straight into the trap. As the door clicked shut behind him, he knew something was wrong. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. The air felt colder than it should have. He glanced around, his eyes darting to the shadows in the corners of the room. But by the time the realization hit, it was too late. Before he could react, before he could even process what was happening, one of the inmates struck. A blow to the back of his head, hard enough to send him reeling into the wall. Dazed, his vision blurry, he tried to fight back, but his body betrayed him, slumping to the floor in a crumpled heap. And that was just the beginning. From beneath the mattress, the other inmate drew a weapon, a makeshift shank fashioned from whatever they could find in this concrete jungle. The steel glinted under the flickering fluorescent light, its edge cruel and jagged, ready to do what words could not. The first blow was quick, direct. The guard barely had time to scream before the second hit came, then a third. The violence was personal, fueled by something deeper than just anger. This was rage, betrayal, fear, all twisted together into something that could only be expressed in blood. They struck over and over, as if trying to erase everything he had taken from them, to make him feel the same helplessness, the same vulnerability they had been forced to endure. In those moments, the prison no longer mattered. The walls, the bars, the guards, they all faded away. It was just the two of them and the man who had shattered their trust, the man who had sentenced them to death without ever firing a shot. By the time another guard stumbled upon the scene, it was already too late. The room was silent now, save for the labored breathing of the two men. The guard was gone, his life stolen in a flash, a life that, in some twisted way, had been taken in the same cold, calculated manner with which he had once controlled his prisoners. He took their lives away, so they took his. But was it self-defense, an act of survival, or was it something darker? Was it justice, or was it an act of cold-blooded murder? When the crime was discovered, there was no attempt to hide it, no scramble to escape, no desperate, frantic run for the door. No, this wasn't a rushed act. It was the culmination of months, maybe years, of pent-up anger, betrayal, and fear. These two men didn't flee. They didn't even try to cover their tracks. Instead, they sat. They waited. One of them laughed. It wasn't a joyful sound, but more like a hollow, twisted release of the tension that had built up within him. The other, he cried. The tears were uncontrollable, though perhaps not entirely from remorse. It was the grief of someone who had seen their humanity stripped away, who had been broken by the very system that was supposed to protect them. The prison alarm sounded, signaling the discovery of the body. Guards rushed to the scene, but it was already too late. The two inmates didn't run. They had nothing left to fear. They knew what they had done, and perhaps for the first time in years, they finally had control over something in their lives. The control had been taken from them long ago, piece by piece, by a man who promised protection, who twisted trust into something unrecognizable. In the aftermath, there was no question of who had committed the crime. They were caught in the act, sitting next to the lifeless body, their emotions raw and exposed. It was a scene that spoke volumes to those who would later study it. an act that could not be neatly categorized as simple revenge or cold-blooded murder. It was both. The trial that followed became a spectacle in its own right. In one corner, prosecutors argued that this was a premeditated, brutal murder, an act of violence fueled by rage, planned in advance, and carried out with chilling precision. They painted a picture of two violent criminals, unrepentant in their actions, using their victim as a pawn in their twisted game of vengeance. On the other side, the defense made its case. They claimed the guard's actions were nothing less than abuse of power, manipulation, coercion, and a violation of the very trust he had been given. They argued that the system, in its failure to protect these men, had pushed them to the brink of no return. In their eyes, this was a crime of survival, a desperate act committed by two individuals who had nothing left but their dignity, a dignity the guard had stolen. Public opinion became divided almost immediately. Some saw it as revenge, a violent but understandable reaction to years of mistreatment. Others saw it as an unforgivable act of murder, no matter the circumstances. In the court of public opinion, the debate raged on. Was this an eye for an eye, a moment of justice for two men who had been failed by the system? Or was it an act of cold-blooded murder, a gruesome crime that could never be justified? And in the end, that question became more complicated than anyone could have anticipated. Was the system at fault, or were these men simply criminals who used their circumstances as an excuse to commit the ultimate crime? The courtroom drama continued, but as the proceedings wore on, the real question remained unanswered. Could the system have done more to prevent this, or had these men been pushed to the edge with no chance of recovery? Was this the final act of justice, or was it the tragic result of years of suffering? As the trial continued, the answer, like the truth itself, seemed to remain just out of reach. As the investigation continued, the layers of this case began to peel back, revealing something far darker than anyone had anticipated. But there was one discovery that would change everything, one detail that would turn everything we thought we knew upside down. It started with sealed medical records. Hidden away, buried in the bureaucracy of the prison's medical department, investigators uncovered a truth that had remained carefully concealed. The guard had been living with HIV for over 2 years, and he knew it. It wasn't a secret to him. He was aware of his condition, of the potential dangers it posed, and yet he had continued to engage in sexual relationships with inmates without ever revealing the truth to them. The implications of this discovery were immediate. Had the guard knowingly infected these men? Was the affair more than just a betrayal of trust? Was it an act of malice? The investigators were left with chilling questions. Had he intended to infect them, to subject them to a life-altering virus out of pure cruelty? Or was it something far more complex? What was his true motive? But then a revelation that shocked everyone. One of the inmates, the very man who had been hardest hit by the virus, had already been HIV positive before he met the guard. The question was now no longer just about the guard's actions. It was about the story the inmates had been telling. Had this been a simple case of betrayal, or had the entire motive been built on a misunderstanding? The truth was now blurred. Could it be that the anger, the rage, the bloodshed had all been triggered by a deadly lie that had been constructed from fear and miscommunication? And now the question echoed louder than ever. Was this truly an act of revenge, or had these men killed an innocent man based on a deadly lie, a lie they had convinced themselves was the truth? In the end, the twists of this story would leave us questioning everything. The trial concluded. The jury deliberated. In the end, both inmates were found guilty of first-degree murder, their lives now forever tied to the brutal death of the guard. No chance for redemption, no hope of parole, just life sentences in the harsh confines of the prison walls they had once known as their home. The verdict was in, but it left behind a trail of unanswered questions. If the god had told the truth, if he had come clean about his condition, would his fate have been different? Could his life have been spared? Or was it too late for him, trapped by his own deception? Some would argue that he got what he deserved, that his actions set into motion the deadly chain of events that led to his tragic end. But others might wonder, did the inmates truly get justice, or did they simply become victims of a deadly lie? As the case closed, we are left to ponder, was this a moment of righteous vengeance, or the tragic consequence of a broken system and broken lives? Could this have been avoided, or was there simply no way out? Now I want to hear your thoughts. Do you think justice was served in this case? Was it an act of revenge or something darker? Let me know what you think in the comments below. And if you love these deep dive true crime stories, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell for more chilling cases like this one. Stay tuned. More mysteries await.